Hello and welcome to another episode of Laptop Retrospective, and I'm on the wrong side of the table. That's because I'm trying a new film setup. So I have this Dell Latitude XT2 for us to take a look at. Now, if you squint really carefully and blur the screen just a tiny bit, this will look very similar to, say, a ThinkPad X series tablet. And there is definitely some similarities. So the XT2 Latitude is, unsurprisingly, a pen-based tablet with basic multi-touch support, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. As you can see, it's no mystery who they were going toe-to-toe with here. Everything from the point stick to the navigation setup, everything paints a pretty clear picture on who their competition was. So we are looking at a 1280 by 800 12.1 inch display, and this came in essentially two variants, a standard variant, which we see here, and then what was called a day view variant, which was just a little bit brighter. In terms of CPUs, again, Dell can be a bit tricky to find this information, but I can confirm that it was Intel Core Duo, SU 9300, 9400, or 9600. And this is actually a 9600, so it is top tier. All of them had the same Intel graphics media accelerator of 4500 MHD, and this is where things get a little weird, and it has to do with the RAM configurations. It was either 1, 2, 3, or 5 gigabytes of DDR3 1066 megahertz RAM. I have no idea what is going on with that. I can only presume that there is some soldered on the board. I can't find a whole lot of information about the technical specs of these outside of a few old reviews, and Dell's website is a bit tricky to navigate depending on the region that you're in. Other things to note is that it came with essentially 3 battery options. Most people would talk about the 6-cell 42 watt-hour battery. However, you could get a lower 4-cell 28 watt-hour, but I would not recommend that at all. And then there was also a 9-cell 45 watt-hour slice that could be installed on the bottom. Before we talk about ports and some of the other features of this laptop, one glaring omission that I do need to point out is that we have absolutely no web camera up here. That's a bit flabbergasting, to be honest, if you have a business class machine like this, and I certainly think that that would date this unit rather severely, especially in the year 2021, when we're just hopefully coming out of the tail end of the pandemic. So with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, let's go ahead and take a look at the ports that are available on this device. We will start with this side here. We have a Kensington lock slot, a headphone and microphone jack, a express card slot, an SD card slot, eSATA, and a few Wi-Fi buttons over here. Along the back we have power port, we have VGA, we have Ethernet, we have a USB port here, and I'm not 100% sure what the fellow is above it. My guess is that it probably connects some kind of proprietary Dell accessory. If you happen to know, please let me know in the comments down below. And then over here we have a kind of a toggle and then a button. And one thing I do need to warn you about these older tablets, especially if you're running a modern operating system on them, very often whatever these things used to do, this could be scrolling for all I know, they don't really work well under modern operating systems because they usually rely on proprietary software that's no longer supported or drivers that are just simply no longer up to date. And then on the last side over here we have a mono speaker, Firewire, USB 2.0, the CPU exhaust, and then oddly enough, pen storage. And this pen is rather unique because it is square at the top, but it is circular where you grab it, which is an interesting design choice. It does have 2 buttons here, so it does help to simulate right click even under Windows 10. And of course the theory is that it is circular where you grip it and hold it, but in terms of the orientation for storage, it can go in essentially any which way, and as soon as you drop it in, it will behave correctly, and then it can be pushed home. So that's kind of a neat little feature. Other features that are worth pointing out is that we do have several key buttons on the display, and as I mentioned earlier, most of these will not work under a modern operating system. Power works, we have control, screen flip, some settings. Again, these three buttons don't really seem to do anything unless you have a really old driver pack installed, and then we have a fingerprint reader over here. So that's more or less a tour of the machine. So without further ado, let's go ahead and do a very quick disassembly of the key components of the machine. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my screwdriver here, and the very first thing that we need to do is eject the battery. You're supposed to pull these catches and then push out on the battery like so. Not the easiest thing in the whole wide world to remove, but thankfully you're not doing it very often. And it's actually split in the middle to make room for the hard drive, which is the first component that we can remove. That's a relatively simple matter of spinning out two screws here in the front. And then two at the back. And that bracket lifts up and out. And then the drive can just be lifted up and removed. So this is actually a very uncommon drive. This would appear to be a 1.8 inch. The only other place I've seen a drive quite like this particular form factor is actually in the X300. So if you are looking for a drive to plug into this, just be aware that you're probably going to be better off trying to adapt something very small that will fit within this form factor. That is exceptionally limiting for what sort of parts availability that you're going to have. That is a 128 gig drive, by the way, if you're curious to know. Moving on to this compartment over here, we will spin out these two screws. And if we remove this cover, we can see that we do have a WWAN slot, and I would be curious to know if an mSATA drive would fit in there, only because that would be a lot easier to get a hold of in terms of parts. But this catch system here looks to be pretty unique. It looks to be screwless. We do have the WLAN card hanging out, and then we have one DIMM of RAM facing us. And this is DIMM B apparently. So this is a 4 GB stick of RAM, and I know that the total amount of memory on this unit is 5 according to Windows. DIMM B would imply that there is a DIMM A perhaps on the other side of the board. However, we have an odd amount of RAM, which is very, very curious. So the only other rather relatively quick part to service, of course, is the keyboard. And to access the keyboard, we need to open up the device on this side and pry this piece of plastic up very carefully. I'm just going to get an old gift card here to help me with that, because I don't want to break it. All right, with that little plastic trim piece out of the way, we can expose these two screws here. And the keyboard is lifting out just a little bit. Let's see which direction our ribbon cable has to go. So we can't fold it. So I kind of have to hinge it up toward you. And then it exposes two other ribbon cables on the opposite side that are on very, very short leashes. So I'm going to go ahead and spin that around because I don't want to really disconnect them, because they're going to be a pain, and quite frankly, there is nothing over on this side to service. It's all just chips. No, that's not true. I guess there's the CMOS battery hanging out there. But that is literally it. Let's go ahead and reassemble this unit, turn it on, and just draw some final conclusions about this machine. Okay, with the unit all back together, let's go ahead and open it up and turn it on. So it gets into Windows pretty quick. I think there is a minor issue with the bootloader on this machine, because what it will do, or at least it has in the past, is it will go to this screen. So we'll just quickly hit enter so it can continue the boot process. And as you can see from the reflection in the screen, I've got some fairly bright lights on this display, and it is readable. Certainly it's more readable than it would appear, but it is, of course, a display of that era. So it's not going to perform amazingly well. It does have an ambient light sensor, which is probably being tripped by the super bright lights that I have set up here. Now, interestingly enough, this should have 2-point touch, and it occasionally registers the touch, but it won't actually do anything. And I suspect that this is probably a driver issue or something of that ilk, because if I use the pen, it works perfectly fine. Now, like I said earlier, one of the biggest drawbacks of this machine when it was brand new, and to me is still a drawback of it now, is it has a very poor battery life if you take a look at its competition. Now, keep in mind the competition was able to fit larger batteries into their machine, but a 42 watt-hour battery running a Intel Core 2 Duo you would think would get better battery life than a maximum of 3 hours, and that's about what I can get on this thing if it's doing absolutely nothing and if the laptop is being ran in battery saver mode. As I also mentioned, you can, of course, fold the display like so, but there does not appear to be any functional rotating buttons, or at least not under Windows. All three of these buttons appear to serve no function, as well as whatever this thing is supposed to do. So just keep that in mind if you are planning on running this on a modern operating system. A lot of the features that you might expect for it to work with simply won't. A few other things that might be nitpicks to some is the user interface down here. Now, this is obviously a very small touchpad, and the buttons are okay for definitely pinch size maneuvers. One thing that I would complain about is the point stick is at the same level as the keys, which doesn't make it necessarily difficult to use, but the acceleration feels a little bit off if you've ever used its competitor, the track point. And the other thing that I'll point out is where these buttons are physically located. If you have average size hands like I do, you actually end up bottoming out this part of your finger because you want to press down on the button, but the button hinges down like so, and you end up kind of cratering in this plastic lip here. So there are definitely a couple of ergonomic issues that I think over time, if you were a point stick fan like me, that would bother you a fair bit. Overall, the laptop does have a few redeeming qualities even in the year 2021, but its competitors in my mind outclass it in about every measurable way, and a lot of reviewers at the time also thought that as well. At any rate, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you did, I would encourage you to do the big four. Please like the video, share, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so the next time I feature an older tablet-style laptop and give you my thoughts on it, you'll be the first to know about it. Thank you so much, and I will see you next time.